Under the warm glow of the kitchen light, they stared at me like they always had, expecting obedience without question. They didn't even flinch when they told me to cancel the wedding. Just stared, waiting for me to surrender again. Dad's fingers tapped rhythmically on the kitchen table, a beat as cold and steady as his voice. "It's not that we don't support your happiness, Emily, but Cassie's not doing well." Mom sat beside him, eyes dry but pleading. "She had a panic attack last night. Just hearing about your wedding set her off again." Cassie sniffled quietly, dramatically, as if on cue. A single tear trailed down her cheek, the perfect performance. She didn't meet my eyes, she didn't have to. Her silence was more pointed than any accusation. All my life, I'd been the buffer between my sister's tantrums and my parents' silence. But this wasn't just another tantrum. This was premeditated. I folded my hands on the table to keep them from trembling. "So, what exactly are you asking me?" Dad exhaled, leaning back in his chair like this was exhausting for him. "We're not asking. We're telling you that postponing the wedding might be best for everyone." I caught the slip, not asking. Just like always. Cassie couldn't handle something, so the world around her had to shift. I was expected to shift. I looked at Mom, but she was watching Cassie with maternal devotion I'd only ever seen directed one way. My voice was barely audible. "And what about me?" Cassie finally turned to me, her voice soft, broken. "Emily, I'm not trying to ruin your life. I can't handle this right now." Seeing you so happy when she trailed off like she wanted me to fill in the blank. I didn't. I just stood. Quietly. Calmly. No yelling. No tears. Just the echo of my chair sliding against the tile floor. "Okay," I said. No one asked what okay meant. The air outside bit at my face as I stepped into the late autumn night. Virginia's trees were just starting to die. Or maybe they were just letting go the way I should have years ago. By the time I reached my apartment, I had already replayed the conversation a dozen times. Each pass-through scraped something raw inside me. The truth wasn't that they were worried about Cassie's mental health. They were worried Cassie would throw another fit. Another scream session. Another public embarrassment. And just like every other milestone, my graduation, my first promotion, even my apartment lease, they expected me to shrink so she wouldn't. The guest list was still sitting on my kitchen counter. I picked it up, flipping through names. Names I'd circled, starred, debated. Most of the stars were family. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I set the list down, walked to the bathroom, and stared at the woman in the mirror. My eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from years of being cast in the shadow of someone else's fragility. "I'm not folding this time." My voice surprised me. Steady. Defiant. I walked back to the counter, grabbed my phone, and opened the contact for the venue. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, but I didn't hesitate long. I wasn't calling to cancel. Not the date, not the cake, not the dress. She picks up her phone to call the venue and changes the guest list. I hit send on the new guest list. No Mom, no Dad, no Cassie. The moment it left my outbox, a tremor ran through me. Not fear, not regret. Something colder. Like cracking ice after too many years of standing still. I sank into the couch, the silence pressing in, and for the first time in a long time, I let it. I'd never dared cross them before, but this time I wanted the silence to be mine. My apartment was cluttered with fabric swatches, veil samples, and untouched bridal magazines. The silence made everything sharper, edges of things I hadn't let myself feel. Guilt relief and a bitter satisfaction. It felt like lighting a match and watching the flame dance too close to something flammable. And still, I didn't flinch. The boutique appointment was at noon. I arrived early and alone. It felt strange removing Cassie's name from the bridal party forms with a pen stroke that felt heavier than it should have. Lila met me there with 2 coffees and the kind of look people give you after a funeral. You sure about this? She asked, setting down the cups. No, I said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. The stylist guided us through satin racks and ivory lace. Every dress I tried felt like armor. Lila didn't push. She just stood close. That was her way of saying she had my back. She really isn't going to be your maid of honor? The stylist asked, glancing at the forms. You had her down originally. I nodded, not explaining. It wasn't just the wedding. This had been building. At my college graduation, Cassie had shown up 45 minutes late wearing a white cocktail dress. She accidentally switched the speech files on my flash drive. When I stepped to the podium and opened it, nothing. Just a blank document. She called it a tech mix-up. My parents called it just a mishap. I never got to deliver that speech. Back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk rereading the finalized guest list before hitting print. I changed the building's front desk instructions too, only confirmed guests allowed upstairs on the wedding weekend. No exceptions. That's when the notification started. Buzz. 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 My phone lit up like it was on fire. Some messages were stunned. Emily, is this a mistake? Did you mean to remove your family? This isn't like you. Are you okay? Some were warmer. Honestly, good for you. I'm proud of you. Call me if you need backup. Then came the family ones. A voicemail from Mom Sweetheart. I don't know what Cassie told you, but this isn't the way. Family is complicated, but we always find a way back. Don't do something you'll regret. No apology. Just subtle shame dressed up as concern. Then Cassie's text. Just one sentence. You always were dramatic. I didn't reply. That night, after brushing my teeth and collapsing into bed, a voice memo came through. I stared at it for a long moment. My thumb hovered, then pressed play. Cassie's voice low and slow. You think you've won something, but you just lost your family. She paused. I heard her breathing. And trust me, Emily, that's going to hurt more than anything I ever said. She ended it there. I dropped the phone on the bed, staring at the ceiling as if answers might be carved into it. For years, I thought losing them would destroy me. But tonight the air felt clearer without their shadows. Buzz. Another notification. This one was a call. No name. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Miss Carter. A man's voice said gravelly but precise. We need to talk about your grandfather's estate. Grandpa left me something. Not just money power. And secrets. I sat across from a man who looked like he'd been born in that office carved from mahogany and legalese. Mr. Hayes adjusted his glasses and folded his hands over a thick manila folder, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. He hadn't offered coffee or small talk, just ushered me in, closed the door, and said, Your grandfather was very deliberate with this. I'd always thought I was invisible to the Carter legacy. Turns out I was the contingency plan. The folder's contents were precise signatures, seals, codicils. Legal terms I only half understood floated by in neat, emotionless paragraphs. But the meaning beneath them, that struck like thunder in a clear sky. I wasn't just receiving a token piece of land or a ceremonial trust fund. Grandpa had left me 40% of the estate. 40%. And not just property control. I now held veto rights on every major decision involving the Carter business operations, real estate holdings, and charitable trusts. My name had been inked onto documents that bore the family crest, documents no one had thought to show me. I don't understand, I said, flipping through a stack of legal papers too thick to digest all at once. Why me? Hayes opened a smaller envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter in my grandfather's looping cursive. Emily, if you're reading this, then the silence has ended. I feared your voice would be drowned in their noise. This is how I make sure they finally hear you. You always listened even when no one listened to you. That's what makes you worthy. Not bloodline, not noise, but clarity. Stay alert. Know when to act. Love, Grandpa. The memory of our last Christmas together surfaced like a heartbeat underwater. We'd sat on the back porch while the others argued inside. He handed me cocoa and said, "Some people inherit power. Others inherit duty. You'll get both." I didn't know what he meant then. I do now. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat gently. They don't know yet. The formal reading is scheduled for next week. Your parents and sister believe they're inheriting as expected. Expected? I repeated quietly, the word bitter in my mouth. Cassie probably had a Pinterest board labeled Legacy. Why now, I asked. He hesitated, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small black key, the kind that felt heavier than metal should allow. He slid it across the polished desk with care. This opens a drawer in your grandfather's private study. One your father never wanted you near. I stared at it. Somehow it felt colder than anything else in that room. Later that night, after the sun had given up on the city, I drove to the old house. No one was home. My parents were out of town. Cassie was posting spa selfies on Instagram. The alarm code hadn't changed. The study was exactly as I remembered: leather-bound books, a dusty chess set, and the grandfather clock that never chimed. I walked to the drawer beneath the window seat, the one Grandpa had once called his quiet archive. The key slid in easily, like it had been waiting. The drawer creaked open. Inside was a thick file nearly bursting at the seams. It was labeled in bold capital letters, Cassandra. Evidence, private. I laid it on my kitchen table, afraid to open it too fast, afraid of what might uncoil from inside. A part of me already knew what I'd find. The rest of me hoped I was wrong. The paper edges were yellowed not from time, but from being handled, read and reread, studied like dangerous scripture. Grandpa always said, "In business and blood, never mix trust with illusion." Now I understood why he'd repeated it so often. The first folder was labeled internal, confidential. Inside transaction logs, wire transfers between Carter Foundation accounts and private vendors I didn't recognize. But the name on every approval slip chilled me. Cassandra Carter. The amounts weren't small: $12,000 here, $37,000 there. All consulting fees, but the vendors' shell companies. One cross-reference to a nail salon that had closed 5 years ago. Another was a pet rescue in Montana. Cassie had never owned a pet. Another folder contained email printouts, pages of them. The subject lines made my stomach tighten. Re-damage control HR complaint. Need your help again. Do not let this go public. In one thread, a woman named Melina, the former assistant Grandpa had fired Cassie for not getting along with, had written a formal complaint to HR. Cassie had allegedly yelled at her in front of clients, withheld bonuses, and demanded personal favors outside her job scope. The last line in the complaint was damning. "I'm scared to be in the office when she's alone." Below it, another email. Sent from Cassie to a senior partner. "Find out what she wants to keep quiet. I don't care what it costs." The hairs on my arm rose. Mixed in with the papers were memos Grandpa had written to himself. Ask Derek if he noticed signs. Talk to bank re-overdraft. Cassie blamed on Emily. Contact outside counsel quietly. He hadn't just suspected something. He'd built a case. I pulled out my laptop and began cross-referencing dates, names, institutions. Every thread unraveled into more. A check to a legal firm in Baltimore that coincided with Cassie's supposed mental health leave. A campaign donation Grandpa had denied ever making routed through Cassie's account. Even notes from meetings with compliance auditors who'd been told they were no longer needed. Then I found it. Folded neatly in a subfolder titled Authorization, Internal. My name. On a signature line. The paper claimed I had approved the transfer of $50,000 to a firm called Artemis Strategy Group. Except I hadn't. I didn't even know what that was. I examined the signature. The curve of the E was all wrong. The tail on the Y was too straight. It was close, but it wasn't mine. Forgery. I sat back, breath tight. All these years, Cassie hadn't just lied, she'd stolen. She'd covered her tracks with charm and fragility, knowing no one would challenge her. But Grandpa had. And now, so would I. I looked out the window. The city was quiet. But inside me, something roared to life. If they wanted a war, they'll get a damn revolution. I didn't need revenge. I needed strategy and silence. The difference mattered. Revenge was loud, impulsive, and easy to dismiss. Strategy was invisible until it landed like a guillotine. Cassie had spent her life being loud meltdowns in restaurants, tears at board meetings, perfectly timed to avoid consequence. But now I would do what she never could. I would move quietly. The first stop was my office. I locked the door, drew the blinds, and slipped my phone into a signal-blocking pouch. I'd bought it yesterday. Paranoia wasn't a flaw anymore. It was an asset. I pulled up every old message chain I had with Cassie. Screenshots of passive-aggressive digs, veiled threats, moments when she dangled family affection like a carrot. Then I called Lila. She arrived an hour later at a quiet cafe downtown, her curls still damp from the rain. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, setting down her matcha. "I haven't," I replied, pushing my tablet toward her. "I need you to help me find every message from the week Cassie tanked my engagement party. Remember, when she accidentally sent that RSVP cancellation blast to my friends?" Lila's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I remember. She used your account, said she was helping." She cracked her knuckles. "Let's dig." For the next hour, we combed through cloud archives, backups, and deleted folders. It was all there. The messages, the digital fingerprints. Lila was a data analyst for a nonprofit, and what she couldn't retrieve probably didn't exist. When we finished, I thanked her without words. Just a long, fierce hug. Then I headed to my final meeting of the day, Jane Rivers. Her office was on the top floor of a mid-rise near the Capitol. No signage, no receptionist, just a discreet keypad and an unmarked door. Jane opened it herself. "Emily Carter," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "You come highly recommended. Mr. Hayes mentioned you'd reach out." She didn't waste time with small talk. I liked her immediately. I laid out everything: Cassie's forgery, the file Grandpa left, the hidden clauses in the will, the upcoming reading. Jane listened without interruption. When I was done, she leaned back. "You have a nuclear button," she said. "And right now you're choosing whether to show it or use it. What would you do?" She smiled. "Wait. Let them perform their little theater at the will reading, then push the button when the audience is still clapping." We reviewed options, one by one. A temporary injunction to freeze Carter Holdings. Grandpa had worded his trust documents carefully. There was a clause allowing a named contingency me to request a freeze pending potential fraud or mismanagement. Jane drafted the petition and slid it across the desk. I read every line. Then I signed. "Petition to freeze Carter Holdings, pending disclosure." I didn't shake. Not even a little. As I gathered my coat, Jane added, "Stay invisible. And whatever you do, don't let Cassie know you're ahead of her." I nodded. By the time I got home, the sun had disappeared behind the buildings, casting a thin red glow across my floor. My phone buzzed. A formal notification: Carter family will reading, rescheduled 10:00 a.m. tomorrow. I stared at it for a long time. Cassie was moving up the timeline, which meant she was on to me. They expected a formality. They got a reckoning. The leather chairs were too stiff, the silence too staged. Every breath felt rehearsed, like we were all extras in a courtroom drama, only no one knew who the villain was yet. Except me. Cassie sat across from me, legs crossed, lips painted in the same coral pink she always wore when she wanted to look innocent. She smiled once, tight, triumphant, and then folded her hands on the lacquered table, ready to receive what she assumed was hers. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As executor of the late William Carter's estate, I will now proceed with the reading of his will, witnessed and notarized 2 months prior to his passing. Dad nodded curtly. Mom didn't look up from her phone. Cassie's eyes flicked toward the door, probably to see if the cameras were still off. She wanted applause, she'd settle for validation. Mr. Hayes began. To my beloved granddaughter, Emily Carter, I leave 40% of my holdings in Carter Group Enterprises, including all attached assets and property, effective immediately. I also grant her exclusive veto authority on any major restructuring, mergers, or asset transfers for a period of 5 years. A pause. Then, to my granddaughter, Cassandra Carter, I leave 10% of residual profits from Carter Group distributed annually, and the rights to personal items listed in the attached inventory. The silence broke. What? Cassie snapped, her voice shrill. That's not possible, that's not. She looked to Dad, who looked to Mr. Hayes, whose expression remained unreadable. Dad sat up straighter. This must be a mistake. He was very clear Cassandra was his preferred heir. Emily wasn't even involved in the business. Mom's voice was ice. This feels intentional. Vindictive. Mr. Hayes reached calmly into his briefcase and pulled out a slim remote. Per William Carter's instructions, I have prepared supplementary materials. Please direct your attention to the monitor. The screen blinked on. Grandpa sat in his study, weathered and weary but steady. His voice filled the room. If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if you're angry, good. I meant every word of that, Will. Cassandra, if you're surprised, you haven't been paying attention. Emily, use what I gave you wisely. Not for revenge. For clarity. Cassie stood. He was manipulated. He was sick. This is fraud. Mr. Hayes remained seated. All medical records and legal certifications are on file. The will is valid. The video was recorded under advisement and witnessed by 2 legal professionals. Cassie's hands shook. She reached for her purse, then slammed it down. This isn't over. Then she stormed out. No one stopped her. My parents didn't follow. They just sat there as if the table itself had swallowed their voices. The power dynamic had shifted and no one knew how to breathe anymore. I stayed seated. Let them simmer. Let the truth burn its way through the silence. Eventually the room began to clear. The witnesses filed out, murmuring condolences they didn't mean. Mom left without a word. Dad paused behind my chair but said nothing. Mr. Hayes lingered. When we were alone, he leaned closer and spoke quietly. He left you something else, he said. But not here. And suddenly I realized. The will wasn't the end. It was the key. There was one more box, and Grandpa made sure only I could open it. The banker led me past 2 steel doors and a fingerprint scanner before gesturing toward a small brass compartment marked 312G. It looked inconspicuous, almost insultingly ordinary, but the key in my palm felt like it hummed. My grandfather's secrets sealed in a vault, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for me. I inserted the key, turned it with a soft click, and slid the drawer open. Inside was a thick manila envelope, a USB drive, and an old-fashioned audio cassette of all things. Taped to the envelope was a folded note written in Grandpa's unmistakable cursive, Emily, if you've made it this far, it means they underestimated you again. Good. Now keep going. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took everything. Back at my apartment, I spread the contents across the dining table like puzzle pieces. The lights were dim, the windows closed, and the weight of what I was about to learn pressed down harder than the Virginia summer heat. The first folder was labeled Cassandra, Internal Complaints. Inside were memos from the Carter Foundation's HR department dated over the past 6 years. Multiple anonymous allegations of verbal abuse, intimidation, and retaliation. Grandpa had underlined several with red ink. On one, he'd written in the margins, settled quietly. Watch her. Another folder revealed wire transfers, substantial ones, to former employees who had abruptly resigned. Each came with non-disclosure agreements and cryptic subject lines like consulting exit or partnership termination. The names matched with people I remembered vaguely, faces that had once worked alongside Cassie, then disappeared overnight. I plugged in the USB. A video began to play, grainy footage of Grandpa at his desk, shoulders heavy, but voice firm. Emily, what I've left you isn't just leverage, it's the truth. I protected this family's name for too long, thinking I was shielding it from scandal. But silence turns to rot. Use this only when silence becomes harm. The next file on the drive was a scanned document, board resolution draft for removal of Cassandra Carter. It had his signature notarized, but in the margin a red stamp blocked, legal objection filed by board counsel. My breath caught. He had tried to remove her years ago. He saw what she was becoming. I sifted through more files. Voice memos from former staff detailing emotional manipulation, Cassie rewriting grant proposals to funnel funds into side projects, gaslighting junior employees, falsifying data to impress investors. The pattern was clear: charm, control, crush. And beneath it all, Grandpa's voice, always watching, always documenting. I sat back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't revenge. This was defense. This was legacy preservation. She had fooled everyone for too long. Not anymore. I picked up the final letter addressed to me. When they come for you, and they will, don't shout. Don't beg. Let them trip over their lies. I built this family's name with my hands. You'll be the one to rebuild it with your truth. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into my journal. Outside, the sky was darkening. Inside, something sharper was lighting up. I whispered, not to the room but to the shadows Cassie had left behind. Time to remove what should have been cut out years ago. I didn't throw the punch, I filed it. The pen felt heavier than it should have in my hand, but maybe that was fitting. After all, this signature didn't just finalize a document, it started a war. Across from me, Jane Rivers was stone-faced as ever, reviewing the final page of the injunction for the third time. Her precision had become a kind of armor for both of us. She didn't offer comfort, only certainty. I preferred that now. Once you sign, she said, her voice even, it's official. Cassie won't be able to move a dime from any Carter Holdings accounts without court approval. And with the supporting evidence from your grandfather, the judge has no reason to delay the freeze. I signed. The ink bled just slightly, like it had something to say. At the courthouse, the clerk took the thick packet of papers and scanned them one by one, fingers moving like clockwork over a keyboard that had seen too many lives changed. She glanced up after a moment, eyebrows raised. Someone's going to feel this, she muttered. Then with a smirk, and not in a good way. The papers were stamped, time of receipt, filed, indexed. Cassie would feel the shockwave by lunch. We didn't wait to celebrate. There was nothing celebratory about war. Back at Jane's office, we reviewed the next steps: how long the freeze might hold, what backlash to expect, how Cassie's legal team would likely counter. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my secured email inbox. A new message had arrived from a law firm I recognized only from Carter Foundation PR statements. Subject: response to injunction filing. The body was short, cold, brutal. All allegations are categorically false. Ms. Cassandra Carter will not be intimidated by falsehoods, manipulated records, or desperate measures taken by estranged family members. Any further defamation will be met with equal and opposite legal force. Attached was a formal letter 12 pages long, full of venom masked in legal jargon. But buried in paragraph 7, I spotted something Jane would love. They denied the existence of key HR complaints I had in my possession. Jane leaned over my shoulder, eyes narrowing. They're lying in writing. That opens doors. Big ones. She was already scribbling notes when her assistant rushed in, breathless. We just received notice from the court, she said. Cassie's team filed an emergency counter motion. They're pushing for an immediate hearing tomorrow morning. Jane stood up, no sign of panic. So much for subtlety. I stared at the papers, wondering how quickly Cassie had mobilized her defense. She always had a sixth sense for control slipping out of her hands. She wants this public, Jane said. Which means she's either bluffing or she thinks she has leverage on you. I didn't answer, because I knew Cassie didn't bluff. She buried. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment, the only light coming from my laptop screen. Legal files lined my desktop like soldiers waiting for orders. I replayed Grandpa's video once more, clinging to the way he had looked at the camera, like he saw me not just as a granddaughter but as a warrior he trusted. My phone buzzed again. No contact name, just a single line. They're digging into your past now. Be ready. I stared at the screen, heart slowing in that awful way it does before it speeds up. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I just sat there in silence. And smiled. I knew it was coming. I'd felt it building like the charge before a lightning strike. Cassie was never going to sit quietly while I dismantled the empire she thought was hers by divine right. Still, when the notification hit my phone, the headline almost made me laugh. Carter Harris, under investigation for insider trading. The article came from a glossy gossip site known more for celebrity divorces than financial analysis, but that didn't stop it from spreading like wildfire. It painted me as a backroom schemer, someone who'd leveraged her family name to manipulate stock prices and silence competitors. There were anonymous sources, blurry screenshots, even a quote from a former college peer suggesting I had a history of cutting corners. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. This wasn't just mudslinging, it was tactical. Precision sabotage designed to ignite whispers, especially among Carter Holdings board members. Lila burst into my office 10 minutes later, laptop in hand, eyes blazing. We traced the metadata on the screenshots. Guess who filed the upload domain 2 days ago? She flipped the screen, Cassie's PR firm. Of course. Jane Rivers joined us not long after, a thermos of coffee in one hand, her briefcase in the other. She didn't sit. Just scanned the article over my shoulder, then nodded like she'd been expecting it. They're testing your threshold, she said, pushing to see how rattled you get. You need to survive this fire to win the war. I wanted to feel angry, but what I felt more than anything was steady, like steel freshly cooled. I'd already scrubbed my closets months ago. I had nothing to hide. But they didn't know that. Still, the smear stung. Especially the quote from my old college peer. It had to be Susan Reller. She and I had been close once. I'd taken the fall for her during a cheating scandal sophomore year, shielding her from academic probation. I hadn't seen her since graduation, but she owed me. And I had a feeling she wasn't the source. Cassie must have used someone to twist the narrative. Jane flipped through a folder she'd brought, then handed me a sheet. We're filing a defamation countersuit. This, she tapped the printed email trail between Cassie's PR assistant and the gossip editor, is our proof. She wasn't smiling, but I was. That afternoon we filed. The language was surgical: defendant willfully and knowingly disseminated false information with intent to damage reputation and obstruct ongoing legal proceedings. The courthouse was humming. Reporters waited near the steps, but Jane led us through the side entrance. No statements, no smiles, just the sound of heels and intent echoing down marble corridors. Back at the office, Lila sat on the edge of my desk, refreshing her inbox every 30 seconds. I could feel the anticipation in the air like a match just before the strike. Then she turned, eyes wide. Check your inbox. I found the whistleblower. My heart thudded. One file, one name. I opened the email, and there she was. Not Susan. Someone else entirely. Someone from deep inside the PR firm. Someone ready to talk. He looked older, but the truth in his eyes hadn't aged a day. The coffee shop was quiet, humming with the low clatter of cups and muted conversations. I spotted him by the window, neatly dressed, glasses perched on his nose, fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped mug like it was armor. Michael Tran. It had been 5 years, but I'd recognize him anywhere. He stood as I approached, a tentative smile flickering across his face. I offered my hand, and he took it firm, respectful, but wary. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," I said. "I almost didn't," he admitted, eyes darting toward the street. "But you said it was about Cassie, and I guess I owe you." We sat. A pause stretched between us, filled only by the hiss of the espresso machine. I watched him, noting the wear behind his eyes. Life hadn't been easy since Carter Holdings. "I remember what she did to you," I said softly. He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Yeah, most people forgot. Including HR. "They didn't forget," I replied. "They ignored it." Michael reached into his satchel, pulling out a thin stack of papers and a flash drive. "I didn't," he said. He slid them across the table. 5 years ago, Cassie had humiliated Michael in front of an entire boardroom, mocked his ethnicity, called him dead weight, then falsified a review that tanked his internship. He'd tried to speak up. HR had buried it. He'd been labeled unstable. I'd tried to help, but back then I had no leverage. Now the pendulum had swung. He tapped the flash drive. Screenshots of Slack messages, calendar entries, one email where she refers to me as that irrelevant diversity stat. I also recorded a conversation she didn't know I caught. He paused. "You'll want to hear it." We plugged his laptop in. The audio was grainy but clear, Cassie's voice sharp and venomous. "I don't care if it's legal. I'll make it happen, or I'll make someone disappear." I looked up. Pulse steady, rage coiled beneath my skin. "She was threatening an employee," Michael said. "Not me, but you get the idea." I did. And more than that, I had what I needed. Jane joined us 15 minutes later, her eyes scanning the documents with clinical precision. "You're willing to testify?" she asked. Michael hesitated. "I can't go public. Not yet. I just started this new job, small firm. They'd drop me in a heartbeat if they thought I was problematic." Jane nodded. "We can file the evidence under seal. Anonymous witness protections can be requested in federal court." Michael exhaled slowly. Then, "Yeah, I'll do it." She shouldn't get to bury people forever. That sentence stuck with me. Back in the car, I stared at the documents in my lap. Years of Cassie's arrogance. Years of silent harm. Now I held the match. I turned to Jane. "We go public. Now." For the first time in years, they had to look at me under oath. I stepped into the courthouse with Jane at my side, our heels echoing off the marble like the opening notes of a symphony. The courtroom was packed, press seated in the back rows, notepads, out, cameras holstered for now. But their pens were weapons, and every blink, every swallow, every misstep would be documented. Cassie sat at the other table, draped in navy blue, and feigned indifference. Her lawyer, sleek and silver-tongued, whispered something in her ear. She smiled tight, rehearsed. But her eyes, they flicked to me like a blade. The judge entered. "This hearing," Judge Connors began, "is to determine the admissibility of injunctions and evidence for full litigation regarding the estate of Edward Carter and defamation proceedings between Ms. Emily Carter and Ms. Cassandra Carter." Jane stood first, calm, controlled. "Your Honor, we submit Exhibits A through F, records of misappropriation, a sealed affidavit from a corroborating witness, and an audio recording." She paused, handing over the evidence packet. "This is not speculation, it's pattern. Years of protected misconduct buried beneath a legacy." Cassie's lawyer rose with a scoff. "Your Honor, this is a publicity stunt. My client has built her reputation with dignity. These accusations are a smear attempt orchestrated by a disgruntled sibling who didn't get her way at a will reading." I almost smiled. Jane leaned in. "Then let's hear from the disgruntled sibling." I took the stand. The room leaned forward. I recounted the moment the will was read, the discovery of the safe deposit box, the sealed file, the forged documents. And then Jane clicked a remote. Cassie's voice filled the room, crackling, distorted, but unmistakable. I don't care if it's legal. I'll make it happen, or I'll make someone disappear. A murmur rippled through the room. Cassie's face turned pale. Jane continued, "We submit this alongside a notarized affidavit from Mr. Michael Tran, an eyewitness and recipient of retaliatory behavior directly from the defendant." Cassie's lawyer objected. Hearsay anonymous witnesses cannot form the basis for injunctions. Judge Connors raised a brow. The court will assess the merits of anonymity at trial. For now, the evidence stands. Cassie's shoulders tightened. I glanced toward my parents. My father stared ahead like he'd rather be anywhere else. My mother clutched her purse like it held her spine. Cassie rose, finally forced to speak. I have no idea where this fabrication came from. None of it is real. That audio could have been faked. And that intern, he was unstable. Fired for cause. Jane smiled politely. He resigned. The judge tapped his pen, slow and deliberate. Due to the strength of the preliminary evidence and the risk of asset compromise, all injunctions filed by the plaintiff will remain in effect. This case is granted approval for full litigation. I exhaled slow, measured. Cassie's lawyer leaned in and whispered something. And that's when it happened. Her face, controlled all morning, cracked. Her eyes darted to our father. He didn't meet them, didn't even move. Cassie's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass and missed. The glass clattered to the floor, shattering into a dozen sharp truths. For once she looked afraid. Not furious. Not furious, masked as confidence. Just terrified. And that look, it was worth every damn step. The lies didn't explode. They unraveled thread by thread until she stood naked in the wreckage. I woke to a dozen news alerts lighting up my phone like a forest fire. Carter heiress under investigation. Insiders say the Ice Queen's throne is melting. The headlines bled red across my screen, but I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I stared at the footage Cassie leaving the courthouse yesterday, her face tight and strained. She didn't wear her usual smugness, just war paint and exhaustion. Her heels clicked like warning shots as reporters flung questions. She said nothing. For once, Jane had warned me. Today, it'll shift from legal to corporate. Be ready for blood. By noon, it began. Carter Holdings' boardroom had always felt cold to me. Glass walls, steel chairs, polished stone that echoed your own doubt back at you. I'd only ever visited as a ghost, never a shareholder with teeth. But this time, I walked in with every document I needed, and 3 board members already briefed. The audit results spoke louder than I ever could. False bonuses authorized under Cassie's signature. Payments to consultants that didn't exist. Even an intern's stipend routed through a shell account one Cassie controlled. She didn't just bend the books, one board member muttered. She rewrote the damn ledger. I handed them the HR complaints, the emails, the internal memos Grandpa had quietly collected. Jane flanked me like a general with evidence stacked like ammo, calm and unflinching. Cassie wasn't present. Of course not. But her assistant was red-faced and jittery, trying to defend the indefensible. My client had discretionary authority. She had no legal grounds, Jane cut in. And Mr. Carter's final directives made that crystal clear. Silence rippled across the room. Then the chair of the board, a man who'd once toasted Cassie at a shareholder gala, cleared his throat. Effective immediately, Cassandra Carter's authority is suspended pending full investigation. No objections. I should have felt relief. But it wasn't over. Not until she stopped clawing. The media poured gasoline on the fire. Fall of the Carter Princess. Golden Girl or Paper Queen talk shows speculated. TikTok creators dissected every angle. One even stitched my courtroom clip with Cassie's leaked audio. The comments didn't show mercy. I stayed quiet. For now. But that didn't mean the house stayed still. Lila forwarded me a clip from a morning news feed. My parents stepping out of their car, hounded by reporters. Cameras caught my father's silence, and my mother's stammered deflections. Our daughter's disagreement is private. She looked brittle, for the first time unsure, unscripted. It was the press conference that cracked the mask. Cassie stood behind a podium, hair pulled tight, lips thinner than truth. She read from a statement, apologies without ownership, explanations without clarity. But the questions kept coming. And then she snapped. My mother knew, she hissed. She knew about the bonuses. She told me to protect the family image. The room went dead. Cassie's PR manager stepped forward, trying to salvage the moment, but it was too late. That one sentence cut deeper than any headline. She didn't just implicate herself, she gutted the only ally she had left. The backlash came fast. Mother-daughter feud. Matriarch in the crossfire. My mother's name was now tethered to the scandal like an anchor to a sinking ship. Lila called me, her voice practically dancing. You're trending. #1, and they're begging for a follow-up. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out my apartment window. The city lights blurred in the distance, millions of lives unaware they'd just watched a dynasty fracture. Cassie once said, everyone wants a crown until it gets too heavy. She wore hers like a weapon. I just learned to carry mine like armor. And now the world was watching who would survive the weight. She built her kingdom on a lie, and I brought it down with the truth. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Sleek surfaces, sharp angles, and eyes that no longer looked at Cassie with admiration. I sat across from her, the chair polished and unfamiliar, yet it fit me better than I expected. She fidgeted in her seat, glancing between faces she once charmed, now silent, neutral, distant. A woman read aloud the motion, a vote to formally remove Cassandra Carter from her role as executive board member due to breaches of ethical conduct, fiduciary misrepresentation, and reputational harm to Carter Holdings. Cassie's lips twitched upward, a ghost of her old smirk, as if she thought this was all an elaborate performance that would bend her way in the end. She opened her mouth, likely preparing a speech. No one asked her to speak. The votes came in. 11 ayes, 1 abstain, 0 nays. Silence. Cassie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat there, shoulders rigid, skin pale, the loss sinking in piece by piece. The chair next to her was already empty. Someone had cleared it without asking. I stood. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just nodded once and left the room. At the courthouse later that afternoon, Judge Connors entered the chambers and wasted no time. The petition stands. Cassandra Carter is barred from engaging in any fiduciary or representative action within Carter Holdings or its subsidiary foundations until the outcome of probate review. Additionally, the late Mr. Carter's secondary trust will be opened under the supervision of the named beneficiary. Jane leaned slightly toward me. Here it comes, she whispered. The judge continued. Per the sealed addendum, the Carter Foundation's long-term guardian is hereby declared to be Emily Carter. Cassie's breath caught. I didn't need to look, I could feel the weight of her unraveling behind me. Reporters circled the marble steps outside the courthouse like hawks. I faced them, posture straight, voice even. This is not about revenge. It's about responsibility. My grandfather trusted me with a legacy, and I intend to honor it with integrity and transparency. The facts have spoken. Microphones clicked, flashbulbs lit. But it wasn't the noise that stayed with me. It was the quiet between the questions, the respect. Behind the crowd, I caught sight of my father. He stood half in shadow, shoulders slumped, his hands hanging by his sides as if unsure what to hold on to. We didn't speak. He just nodded, once slow, heavy. I returned the gesture. Nothing more. Back at Mr. Hayes's office, the lawyer placed a thick envelope on the mahogany desk between us. His expression was gentle, reverent, almost paternal. Your grandfather asked me to deliver this only after today's ruling, he said. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe another legal document, a final piece of advice. But inside was a single brass key resting on a slip of vellum paper. On it, in my grandfather's crisp handwriting, were 3 words: the real legacy. Jane exhaled beside me, but said nothing. Lila, leaning against the doorframe, offered a small, knowing smile. For a long moment, I stared at the key. It didn't shine. It didn't sparkle. It was plain, heavy, real. I closed my fingers around it. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about carrying something forward, something deeper than profit or name or power, something true. And I was ready. Winning never felt like revenge. It felt like clarity. The cabin smelled like cedar and old books. Grandpa's comfort frozen in wood and dust. I hadn't been here in years, but everything was exactly as I remembered: the creaking floorboard near the stove, the chipped mug hanging by the sink, the view of the lake shimmering like glass beyond the porch. I stood by the edge of the dock, urn in hand, the ashes warm against my chest like memory refusing to cool. He'd asked for this. Not a church, not marble, just the lake, just the silence. The wind picked up as I twisted open the lid. Ash danced before settling over the water, curling into eddies like smoke seeking its own horizon. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. He wasn't gone. He was the calm in my lungs, the steel in my voice. The voice I had finally learned to use. A car pulled up behind the cabin. Tires over gravel. Slow. Hesitant. I didn't turn around until the door shut. My father walked toward me, hands empty, face older than I remembered. No suit today. Just a plain gray jacket and guilt draped over his shoulders like rain. He didn't speak, just stopped a few feet away and looked out at the lake with me. The silence stretched, but for once, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like language we had never been taught, wordless, brittle, necessary. After several minutes, he said simply, "He chose well." That was all. But it was more than I'd ever heard from him when it mattered. I didn't reply. I just nodded and turned back to the lake, letting the last of the ashes slip through my fingers. Later that evening, I sat in my new apartment, half furnished, half hope. Lila was sprawled on my rug, legs crossed, laptop open. We were finalizing the last headline, the closing of the media chapter. The statement was short, sharp, and unlike the Carter family playbook, true. "Done," she said, tapping send. "It's over." "No," I said. "It's just beginning." The statement didn't mention Cassie by name. It didn't have to. It simply laid out the facts, corrected the narrative. No vengeance, no poison, just light where there had been fog. Jane texted, "The board ratified your appointment. The foundation is yours to lead. Congratulations." I exhaled. The foundation. The part of Grandpa's legacy that mattered beyond wealth. He had built it for underserved communities, quietly funding clinics, shelters, mentorship programs. While Cassie sought applause, he built impact. And now, it was mine. The next morning, I visited a youth shelter on the south side, the same one Grandpa once drove me to years ago, saying, "This is where leadership begins." A boy no older than 9 sat on the steps, fiddling with something in his hands. When I approached, he looked up, unsure. "Hi," I said gently. "I'm Emily." He held out a broken wristwatch, its hands frozen at 2:17. "Can you fix time?" he asked. I knelt beside him, smiled. Not time, but maybe today. He grinned, and for a moment the weight in my chest lifted. Inside, I walked through rows of donated books, counseling rooms, quiet corners. I saw potential in cracked ceilings, hope in scraped walls. This wasn't redemption. It was purpose. As I stepped back into the sunlight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A clipped voice said, "Miss Carter, this is the Senate Ethics Committee. We're requesting your presence regarding testimony in the Carter Holdings inquiry." I didn't flinch. I'll be there. I ended the call and looked up at the sky. Clouds were parting. The storm had not broken me. It had revealed me. The key didn't open a door. It opened a future. Capitol Hill was quieter than I expected. Or maybe it just felt that way after the months of chaos, courtrooms, cameras, and closed fists in silk gloves. I sat across from a young Senate staffer in a cramped chamber office, the ceiling fan whirring above us like a metronome marking the pace of change. The folder I placed on the table was heavier than it looked. Not with weight, but consequence. Everything's in there, I said. Names, transactions, policy drafts linked to family interests. He knew. He tracked it all. The staffer flipped through the first few pages, eyebrows rising by the second. You understand this could trigger hearings across multiple committees. I understand, I said, that pretending not to know would make me one of them. He nodded, reached for a secure envelope, and tucked the documents away. We'll be in touch. I left without fanfare. No press outside. No statement. Just the crisp autumn air brushing against my blazer and the sense that for once, I wasn't reacting to their game. I was writing my own. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I climbed the stairs to the rooftop I'd discovered during those early foundation meetings. It was high enough to see the Capitol dome, far enough to breathe without being watched. The sun was sinking, casting gold across stone and shadow. I stood at the edge looking out. I didn't reclaim my name, I whispered. I rewrote what it meant. The Carter legacy wasn't what Grandpa left me in his will. It was what he prepared me to become. The key he gave me had never been about power or access. It had been about discernment, knowing when to speak, when to fight, when to choose silence, and when to turn it into strategy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Lila. I answered with a smile already forming. The board just voted, she said. They want you to chair the foundation. I hesitated, not because I doubted my readiness, but because I knew what came with that chair. Responsibility, legacy, a mission built from broken ground. I'm in, I said, but we start with education. Not just charity transformation. We build what they tried to bury. Lila exhaled on the other end, a soft laugh, carrying years of shared struggle. Hell yes. As the sky darkened, I thought about Grandpa again, about his note tucked into that last file. The real legacy isn't gold. It's what you do when no one claps, when no one watches. No one was clapping now, but I wasn't waiting for it. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address. Just a plain envelope neatly folded. I opened it slowly. Typed, center-aligned, just one line. You're not done. Neither are we. No name, no threat. Just a reminder. I didn't feel fear. I felt the key again in my coat pocket, smooth and steady. Let them come. I was ready. They tried to erase me with silence, but silence became my strongest weapon. In the courtroom behind closed doors and on rooftops at dusk, I rebuilt everything they tried to bury. Not with vengeance, but with truth, because justice, when earned, doesn't roar. It resonates. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but once it plays, it changes the room. Perhaps standing up today means you'll never again have to bow to injustice tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, share and drop your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt seen. Comment 2 if you still wanted more.